the laundry, every time I sit down to do a series of laundry, it just kind of cheers me up. This lovely little meditative thing. I just sit down and paint these tiny things. They're really fun.
Welcome back, everybody, to another inspiring and fun episode of Beyond the Palette. I'm your host, Whitney Rosenson, owner of Art Dimensions, and today I am thrilled to welcome painter Jill Sykes to our show. I'm really excited for all of you to get to know her. Remember to please rate and review this podcast, which will greatly help to expand our reach. You can do that on Apple Podcasts. That would be so appreciated. We're going to welcome Jill. Hey, Jill.
Hi, Whitney.
Hi.
How are you? Thank you. This is going to be great.
Oh, how are you?
I'm good. I'm actually really good. I've got this nice little boost of energy lately, which is kind of fantastic.
That's great. That's great. Yeah. Well, we're excited. I'm excited to have you. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to chat with me.
More than happy. Great to see you.
Oh, thank you. What are you up to these days in your studio?
I have an awful lot of stuff going on right now, which is really exciting and very daunting at the same time. I've got a 4 canvases in the work for a small show I'm doing with a group I occasionally work with. We call ourselves Quartet because there are 4 of us. So I'm almost finished with my first one. We'll see. I'm not quite done yet. I also have 3 other very large projects that I'm about to start on. I just ordered panels for one of those, so that'll be fun.
Can you share, or are they top secret?
Oh, no, not that they're top secret. They're just sort of still in my head, still little sketches in my head.
Okay.
So my first step was to price out how much are these panels going to cost. So I just ordered 3. There'll be like 24 by 18, and it'll be like a triptych.
Oh, beautiful. And they're wood panels. They're going to be wood panels.
They'll be wood panels, and I want them to be, I specified, give me nice birch so I have the grain all in the same direction because I'm just going to stain it. I want to see that grain coming through.
Oh, pretty.
And I'll paint over that. So, but I won't get them for like 3 weeks because everything's on back order.
I know. What can you do?
But anyway, meantime, I also have 2 paintings at the Riverside Art Museum in a show that opened up several weeks ago, but because of COVID, we didn't have an opening. But they finally gave us a date for the opening, which is December 5th.
Awesome.
Please come to Riverside. Everybody come to Riverside. It's going to be a fantastic show. And it's called Epic Takeover. And then my friend Ada Polini Brown, who I don't know if you know her, she's a painter and an educator. She and I have been working together on a show for the Brand Library. We've got about 24, 25 artists, plus a series of work from Self-Help Graphics. And that opens in January on the 22nd. And that show, we started working on that, curating that show together over 2 years ago. And it got delayed and delayed and delayed because of COVID. And we finally are going to have an opening and finally get everybody on the walls. And
that is exciting.
Yeah, that's fun.
You curated that. Do you have work in that show too?
Of course, I have work in that show.
Okay, what's the date again? January what?
January 22nd at the Brand Library. I think they open at like 4:00 in the afternoon, but I could be lying. I'm not exactly sure. That'll be really, I'm very excited. We've got an amazing group of very diverse artists, and it's all about basically a reaction to the last 4 years, let's say 5, So it's interesting to see what artists come up with and how they react to the world, depending on who they are and where they are and what their world is like. And to bring all that together is going to be a really cool show. I'm very excited.
Oh, I'll definitely go see that. That sounds
Yes,
amazing.
You have to.
And did you always want to be a painter?
I didn't always want to be a painter, but I always wanted to be an artist. Like from the get-go, I was always an artist. And like the minute I could hold a crayon in my paw, I was making drawings. And I wrote this in a book several years ago, a story that my mother told me when I was little about how I'd made a drawing of a cat. And my mother asked me, how did you come up with the shape of the cat's hind leg? Because I, did that sort of knee thing. curved around. It wasn't just 4 sticks. It was like a curve shaped to the leg. And apparently I said something like, gee, mommy, haven't you ever felt a cat's leg? Which I just thought was funny at the time, but her point as an adult parent was like kind of going, what 4-year-old thinks to do that? So I was surrounded by art my whole life. I mean, my parents didn't take me to museums, but we had tons of books. My mother had worked at Disney. Her best friends were all the animators. My dad was in the film industry. I was very, very lucky on that score.
Surrounded by art your whole life.
Surrounded by art. And also I was fortunate enough to go to LA Unified when there was tons of money, and I had an art class every single day.
Wonderful.
So by the time I got out of high school, I had a killer portfolio. No, I wasn't aware that that was an unusual thing. I mean, I had an elective every year, so I just took another art class, and they weren't necessarily related. So, give me an assignment. Oh, that'll be fun. And I would just go do it. So I had this amazing skill set that I wasn't really conscious of at the time.
I think as teenagers, we're not really conscious of too much.
An awful lot. Yeah, we don't know anything, but they let me draw. They let me paint. They let me do whatever. Yeah, it was great. So by the time I got ready for art school and trying to work and trying to do stuff, I realize now, a really incredible portfolio. And I was, 18. So
Amazing.
I was lucky.
And where did you go to art school?
I went to art school. Well, I started off taking classes at Otis. I went to college for a while, couldn't get an art class. Bailed from that, started taking classes at Otis, and I didn't want to go to Art Center because Art Center had a dress code at the time. That was the deal breaker for me. Between that and the fact that I was still going to have to stay home in Encino with my parents, and so the same with Otis. So I sort of stumbled across this weird bunch of coincidences. I found a school in San Francisco called the Academy of Art, and it was a tiny little school at the time. And I didn't even realize it was more of a commercial art school, even though there was a painter teaching downstairs, this woman named Joan Brown, who scared the crap out of me, but there were some really amazing people working in that school.
When you say commercial?
More like advertising, graphic design, fashion design, illustration. It was very, very big on illustration, but we still were taking figure drawing, head drawing, anatomy, all the same stuff, but the focus was more like, and this was actually good for me in a lot of ways. You want to be an artist, don't you want to eat? So, and I had a boyfriend at the time up there who was the epitome of the stereotype of the starving artist. And he was literally crashing in some old building that had been abandoned. He was a brilliant painter. He'd studied at Yale. He was fantastic, and he was starving. And I looked at Tom and just went, graphic design looks good. So anyway, it was a good experience for me. It was actually a very good experience for me. I mean, I wish I'd stuck it out longer, but it was good.
Going back to that time, when you began your career, it was shortly after art school, I'm assuming. And who or what influenced your art when you began your career?
I actually got a job offer right out of school, working for an educational film company. So I did a lot of illustration and graphic design for them. And between those freelance jobs, I would do ink and paint. So I was still kind of really involved in animation. I mean, I wasn't the creative, I was just back painting cells. But it's funny, I had very little respect for the fact that I had a paintbrush in my hand 24/7. I originally wanted to do like film poster design, because I've been heavily, heavily influenced by the likes of Saul Bass. And I, in fact, have a Vertigo poster in the other room. I mean, the man was brilliant. So I gotten turned on to the likes of Saul Bass and pushpin graphics.
And also your parents, your father was in the film industry, you said.
My father was a cameraman right after the war. He was working in early television, and he worked in film and television. And eventually he got a job doing like industrial films and educational films. I mean, truth be told, that was my connection to the educational film company, because those people knew Dawn's daughter, and I was just out of art school and wasn't going to cost them a lot, but they liked me, so they kept hiring me back. My dad was long gone from that job at that point. Yeah, and my mother had worked at Disney. She ran the research department over there for many, many, many years, but her pals were all the animators. She used to take me out to lunch at a place called Alphonse. I was a little girl. I have a Shirley Temple and a turkey sandwich, and I'm hanging out with these animators who were famous people. Yeah, they were just nice people. And we had stuff on the walls from them. It was great. My mother was actually a really interesting collector. So my eye was pretty well tuned, even though I didn't, intellectualize it too much. So anyway, that was my life in graphic design, and I still love graphic design. I was designing some postcards just the other day. That's just falling off a log for me. That's nothing. It's just, but I know how to
You know
play
how
with it.
to, yeah.
It's just fun. It's
So
just
that
fun.
influenced your career or your art when you began your career. What influences you now?
Well, I first started painting. I come to the conclusion that doing commercial art was not that much fun because it was always somebody else's idea, and you're constantly foraging for a gig. And anyway, it was just wearing on me. And the story that I've told the story many times, I was shopping with my mother one day a long, long time ago, and I was getting bored and tired. And it was a design place. It was furnitures and stuff like that, and dishes and books. There were two sofas and a coffee table and this big fat art book. And I said, Mom, I'm going to go sit down. And I opened up the book to something I'd never seen before. I had no idea that this kind of painting even existed. And I quick ran over to my mother, grabbed a piece of paper and a pencil and copied it. And the next day I went and got a big canvas and I copied the painting because I didn't know you could do that. And I wasn't smart enough to write down the size of the painting, although I could see that it was acrylic. But I was smart enough to write down the painter's name. It was Helen Frankenthaler,
Okay. Okay.
who, I mean, she wasn't covered in any of our books in school. I didn't know about that. So she pushed me in a really interesting direction.
Mm, I love that.
Anyway, so eventually I segued that into oils, and the staining. That whole sort of abstracty thing just didn't work real well for me with this other medium. And I was taking a class with somebody who literally put a plant in front of me and said, draw the space. There were other people in this little group, and I was like, oh my God, negative space. I love negative space. Nobody else knew what she was talking about.
But you did.
And that's that started the whole deal with the plants. And I still have that painting. It's hanging in the room right over there.
So I just want the listeners to know, if they don't know, if they're not familiar with your work, first of all, Jill's website where you can see a lot of these is jillsykes.com. It's Sykes. And she does these lovely organic branches and leaves and flowers. Those are your oils. You also have an architecture series, right? I know that there are pretty much 4 series. We've got the oils, the architecture, the gold leaf, and the laundry.
The laundry, yeah.
I love the laundry series.
Thank you. It really harkens back to my graphic design sensibilities too, as do the botanicals, sort of flattening things out into shapes and shadows. And the laundry, every time I sit down to do a series of laundry, it just kind of cheers me up. This lovely little meditative thing. I just sit down and paint these tiny things. They're really fun.
Are they on paper or they're on panel?
Most of those are on paper. I have 1 or 2 that were ended up on canvas as oil paintings, but the smaller scale of these pieces was more appropriate to what the drawings were conveying. They're sort of intimate little things.
Yeah.
Even though if you really looked at the scale of some of these, I mean, some of these laundry pieces have strings and strings and strings, and you're looking way up at sheets and towels and socks, and you realize that's a big thing. Something about seeing laundry, it just felt more intimate. So it needed a smaller scale.
Also, there are some intimate items.
Yes, that's on purpose. And the genesis for this whole series was an installation that I saw many years ago in Salt Lake City by an architect who'd been a professor of my elder son. And we'd gone back there to see him, and it was a big retrospective. He's a very famous, well-known land architect guy. So they were recreating a lot of his works and had a lot of his photographs of projects and stuff. But on the outside of the building, outside of the museum, from the rooftop of the building across a lawn to like the lampposts on the sidewalks, were strings of laundry. I mean, it was like, what is that? So he comes over to me. I knew him. And we're talking about it, and he explains to me this is something he'd done in whatever the town was in Italy, and the whole idea was to bring the intimate neighborhood, day-to-day life into the downtown part of the city where the shops and the churches and all this other, where the tourists are. This is what real people are doing. And I've seen pictures of it, and it's a pretty famous installation. But then he said to me, he was very funny. He said, he's puffing this little cigar. He says, but Jill, we're in Salt Lake City. I go, yeah. And he said, they're Mormon here. Yeah. He says, no underwear. They had to get a permit to do the whole thing. So the city had to approve it because it's outside, right?
Right.
That all makes sense.
Right.
But they wouldn't let him hang any underwear. And he was kind of cranky about it.
That's hysterical.
It was hysterical. So I sent the museum. I talked to a woman at the museum that night, and I said, I have an idea, blah, blah, blah. Would you be open for this? Just yes, send it on. So I sent the museum 7 brassieres of various colors. And the point was, hang them on the line, the day before you have to take this stuff down. Tell them some renegade teenage kids did it. Anyway, I didn't hear from them for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks. And finally, one day I got like 20 images in an email. All the bras that got put up, plus boxer shorts, petticoats. They had totally augmented this whole thing with more stuff. And so that's what started my laundry series.
Oh, I love your laundry series. I want to, can you just tell the listeners what materials you use to create that series?
Very simple. It's just white acrylic paint on paper, beautiful paper. Once in a while, they might end up on a panel or something, but I just make a drawing from images I find, photographs I might take of socks hanging on a wall, and kind of put them all together. It's just flat acrylic on paper, matted and framed. They're really pretty.
They're really pretty. Let's go back to the negative space that you were talking about for a minute. Explain that a little bit more, what you mean by negative space and how that is such a strong influence in your work and your architecture series too. And I want to talk about the Sycamore house after, but let's talk about the negative space.
Well, the negative space was a concept that I got in art school. And literally what it means is the space between the solid thing that you're drawing. So for me, if I'm looking at a tree branch, you've got the solid branches, but what I tend to focus on is the space between those branches. And by focusing on that space, it tends to reinform the entire drawing. I'm starting from a full drawing. All my work is, I always have a drawing. But in the course of doing the painting, if I focus on the negative shapes, it just changes things. It puts it in a different light somehow. It kind of shifts it a bit. And so the laundry is a really good example of that. If you look at it, it's just a bunch of holes that if you look at the holes, you realize it's a bra. So I try very hard not to render stuff. I might put shapes and shadows within those shapes. Yeah, it's the spaces between the solids. I guess it's not a bad way to put it.
Thank you for explaining that. So the architecture series, I know you did some work on a couple of homes in Los Angeles. And tell us about the process that consisted of. I mean, these are Jill's designs are on the outside of the homes, and the negative spaces and the branches and the flowers are really, they pop, but very subtly. I don't even want to say pop. They really resonate, but it's subtle, and the shadow work is great. So what was that project like for you?
Well, the first project was for an architect named Michael Kovac, and he was redesigning his personal home and to make it a showcase project for his firm. He does a lot of very high-end expensive homes and all over Southern California. Anyway, he's pretty amazing. So he called me up. He and his wife had bought some work from me, and they called up and said, you have an idea, come on over, we want to talk to you about it. Are you interested? And you go, yeah, sure. I didn't know how to do that, but I knew how to do that. They basically tore down the whole house, and they saved these 3 or 4 sycamore trees that were on the property. And they built the new home and really wanted to emphasize that these trees were there. So his idea was he found this material called EcoChim, came from Italy, and it is like literally screwed on the wall like panels on the outside. And so my design was I want to say like wallpaper, except there's nothing repeated. This is all an individual flowing design that goes across the front of the house, the garage, down this wall, and then back down this wall, this 2 stories. And the entire design was sandblasted onto this material. So it's like sort of a reverse bas relief. The thing that's really amazing about it is down in the Palisades, is that the shadow, there are internal shadows because the design is indented into this material. So as the sun moves, you get shadows from that, plus you get shadows from the trees. So the whole thing is moving all day long. If you were to just sit there with a time lapse, the whole thing is moving all day long. One of the things I love about the negative space idea that I hadn't planned on, it's just something I realized, you're working with a lot of amorphic shapes. And sometimes you look at those shapes and you come back and you go, oh my gosh, I see a fish. And sometimes things can look kind of rude. So you either fix that or you don't, depending. And I told Michael one day, you will come home one night, probably more than once, and look at that wall and suddenly a face will pop out. I didn't plan it, but you will see stuff because it's just sort of the nature of the beast.
That project is magical.
I have actually had people come into my studio during art walks, and I always have catalogs around about it and some pictures, just a little advertising about it. That's your house? I jog by that house every day. It's really wonderful. It was just such a dream project. It was really, really hard, and I really had to figure out a lot of technical stuff, but it was fun. And then a couple of years ago, he called me back for another project, which was very gratifying. I did a door for a new home that's 11 by 3.5 feet. It's an
Oh, wow.
11-foot door.
Wow.
And again, everything was cut out. In this case, it was cut out of aluminum and then put over another sheet of aluminum that's a different color. It's darker. So that's the front door of this home.
Well, this is all, there are photographs of these on Jill's website, so I encourage everyone to look at those. When do you deem a painting to be finished?
That's a really good question. Sometimes you just know, and sometimes you just kind of go, oh, I'm done. God, I'm done. But a lot of times when that happens, when it's just like, I got to be done with this. I'm done with this. I have a painting I was working on not too long ago, and it hasn't been varnished yet. It hasn't been photographed yet. It's just sitting there in the studio. And I was looking at a book of color with a neighbor of mine because she just was looking for some stuff. And she opens it and said, oh, isn't that a beautiful aubergine? And I looked at it and I went, yes, that's what that painting was supposed to be. Thanks, I think. So, that's my next project, to put another coat of paint on this big palm front because the color wasn't quite right. The delays of getting the thing photographed, just because I was busy, you kind of sometimes just have to go with that because the delays gave me the opportunity to now go back and repaint it. So
Yeah, definitely.
so I've got a piece on my easel right now that I thought was done, but it's not done. It's not done.
So sometimes and sometimes you just feel like it's time for the painting to be done.
Yeah, but generally the latter means you're sort of lying to yourself. You're just
Right.
tired of it. You just need to do something else, and then you come back and finish it later. So I know people that come back and work on things for years, off and on for years.
Right.
I tend to start something and I'll plow through it till I'm done, and then I'll go on to the next one.
Well, you have a lot of work. I mean, you're very prolific. It's amazing. If you could collaborate with one other artist, who would it be?
Well, I've done a couple of collaborations. They're very tricky. I did a great collaboration a year or two ago with a wonderful photographer I know named Jane Zabo. And we came up with some really terrific ideas and a really beautiful piece in particular that showed out at the Museum of Art and History in Lancaster. So that was great. And we've done a couple other little tiny things along the same line. I did some printmaking collaborations with this group of 4 people that we call Quartet. That was fun, kind of an experiment, but that's just for me that we were just sort of playing, just truly playing in the studio, which is so
Gratifying?
It's really gratifying, even if the end result isn't fabulous, or you want to rework it, or you want to tear it apart for the 4 of us. It was just this fantastic exercise. So let's try this and let's try that. And so we just kind of,
Went for it.
went for it. So that was very fun. Right now, I'm in talks with a really brilliant artist named Catherine Rowan. We're putting together some packages. So that's all I can say, really. We're still
Exciting.
just sort of talking, thinking, looking at images, and does this go with that? And
So interesting.
yeah, it's really interesting. It's really fun. It's really fun.
Now that we're in the time of COVID and it's a pandemic still, I wanted to ask you, has that affected your practice at all?
It really turned out in hindsight to be a really super big wet blanket. You know, I have a wonderful studio at the brewery, and I have roommates who were all gone. The guys that were renting from me in the loft, they're mostly on the computer, so they just bailed. They still pay the rent. God love them, they pay the rent. The guy in the back lives out of the country, so I had this place all to myself, which was great. So I was able to drive from my house to the studio in like 20 minutes, which was so just like fantastic. But somehow getting excited about anything was really, really a challenge. And getting things done has been really a challenge. Halfway through last year, I got a call from the Metro people about I've been shortlisted for a project. And so I worked on that. I gave the proposal. That was such a emotional shot in the arm. And I had a couple of neighbors who would come in and kind of collaborate with them. Just say, what do you think of this? Oh, make it bigger, the way you do with other artists. That was, and I won the project. So that was just an amazing thing. But of course, the whole thing got put on hold because of COVID. So we haven't done it. So the project is still sitting in my computer and in a file. I'm waiting for them to say, okay, we can go. And
The time will come. The time will come.
the time will come. Yeah, I think so. And it's really going to be a beautiful, beautiful thing. I hope it happens. It's going to be really fun. And it's a proper job where somebody's paying you to do something. How great is that? So, but this is where the crossover between my graphic design and my fine art is a perfect fit, because a lot of the tools that I learned doing the graphic design are totally, totally in play here. I think they feed each other really, really well.
I want to wrap up a little bit, but I want to ask you, what materials do you like to work with and why? Present, let's say today.
Well, at the moment, I'm working in oil on canvas. I'm trying to finish this oil on canvas piece that I told myself was finished 2 days ago, and I lied. I lied to myself. I really love working on canvas, and there's this surface that I prime the canvas with that gives me a really smooth, sexy surface to put that paint on. And it also tends to obliterate the texture of the fabric. So, so you're not fighting that. So I just really, really love painting on that kind of surface. But then I've also recently discovered, as I said earlier, working on panels. And I tried that just as a whim somehow. I don't even remember how I started doing it, but this whole idea of incorporating the grain
Yeah.
of the wood.
Yeah.
And I'm not the only person that does this. It's not like I invented this wheel, but it's very cool. So I get these panels and I kind of line them up and see how they're going to go, if they're going to be together, and which grain flows into the next panel best. And so I've got 3 projects I want to work on panel. 2 of them I really need the grain, and then the third one I'm going to obliterate the grain completely, but I need the harder surface.
Oh, so you need the panel versus the canvas.
On that project, it's strictly because I want a harder surface.
Got it.
Then I'll go back to the canvas, because the canvas is a whole different story.
On my website, on Art Dimensions, just so the listeners know, on artdimensionsonline.com, you can see Jill's page. If you click in the upper right-hand corner, it says artists, and click that, and then scroll down till you see her name, click her thumbnail, and that will take you to her page. But there are works on canvas and panel on that page, so you can see just various pieces that Jill has done over the years, which are really, really lovely. My last question is, I just like this question, and I hope you find this interesting to talk about. What is your favorite aspect of being an artist, and what is the hardest thing about being an artist?
I think the hardest thing about being an artist is just keeping your head above water. hearth and home and all of that is really, really a challenge. If you're a freelance artist, is very difficult. If you have this is why I wanted to go into graphic design and illustration. It was a job. You got hired to do a job, and they paid you to do a job. This was like really, And I was, again, very blessed with my parents. They both just said over and over, do whatever you want, but be able to pay the rent. We will support that, but pay the rent. So that's probably the hardest thing for almost anybody I know, unless you were smart enough, and I wasn't, to get an MFA and you get a teaching job, and that gives you
Subsidizes.
Yeah, that's what I don't know that I would have made a good teacher, but I would have.
You would have.
Maybe.
Yes.
But anyway, the best part about it is that I never have to retire. I get to do this till I drop dead, right? On some level, and I will, because that's just, becomes who you are. And the other thing about being a fine artist as opposed to a commercial artist is I get to do whatever I want. And if I fall on my face, if that experiment didn't work, paint over it and do it again. Do something different. But it's on me. I get to do what I want. I get to throw wet acrylic on a raw piece of canvas and see if that works. And it's on me, and it's fun.
That's awesome.
That's why I do it, I guess. I had a kid ask me once, a young person, not a baby, at an open studio one day, how did you know you wanted to be an artist? And I just looked at this kid and I went, oh, I never had a choice. And then I went, oh my God, what did I just say? And I realized how true it was. It's just, sometimes you just are born doing that thing. It's a real gift, but it's also kind of a chore. But
all right, I lied. That was not my last question. What advice would you give for emerging artists out there who are listening to this podcast?
Be easy to work with. Don't be a jerk. I mean, really, just keep your ego in check. And if somebody wants you to do something, just be polite. Say yes. Or if you can't do it, be polite and say no. But, I mean, take yourself seriously. Take your work seriously. If you want somebody else to take you and your work seriously, that's never going to happen if you don't do it yourself. Don't be a jerk about it. And be responsible. Answer phone calls. And if something messes up, apologize. Just be a person.
Great advice.
But meet your deadlines and do the gig. And be really grateful that you got offered. There's 1,000 people just like me looking for space on a wall. So if you can't be easy to work with.
No, beautifully said. They're going to find somebody else, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, and even if your work isn't exactly what they want, they might at least remember you because, oh, she's so easy to work with and she's on time and the work is good and we'll get her something, is that sort of accumulated kind of
reputation, right?
Yeah. You just build it up and it's all fine. It's all good. Just do it. Just keep doing it. And stay in school, finish up.
Great advice. And I hope there are some budding artists out there listening. Thank you, Jill. I really appreciate this. You welcomed us into your creative world, and it was so fun to chat with you.
It was great to chat.
Oh, thank you. Well, I highly recommend checking out jillsykes.com, Sykes, to see more of her images. And also be sure to check out Jill's incredible paintings on the Art Dimensions site. Lastly, we're also on Instagram at Art Dimensions and at Jill Sykes. So be sure to check those accounts out. And to Jill and everybody out there listening, have a great week and happy creating.